Alright guys, I'm going to go over Firestarter 21, 22, 23, and 24 today. This first one, Firestarter 21, it was an entirely effort-based assignment. So if you didn't read your instructions from Google Classroom, it says it right there. You may use Google to help. You literally could have Googled all of these and just typed in your answers. So for those of us who didn't do it, I don't know what to tell you. So what is the quadratic formula? It is a formula. It is the formula used to solve any quadratic equation. Oh, I spelled equation wrong. Alright. I'm actually going to write it out and stuff later. When can the quadratic formula be used to solve quadratic equations? If you have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, right? And then you get your answer as x equals, and actually there's two of them, or there could be two. X equals plus the opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What are the benefits of using the quadratic formula? It always works if set equal to 0. All right, that's the biggest benefit, right? It's guaranteed to work, all right? It's easy to set up. It's straightforward. It's a step-by-step process. Now, this is not maybe what Google said. I didn't Google it. I'm just doing what I have seen in my personal experience as a teacher. So some of your stuff might be slightly different. That's not wrong, as long as you have evidence to back it up. What are the disadvantages to using the quadratic formula? Well, the disadvantages are it takes up a lot of space. It's a lot of space. Usually we have to deal with radicals. So usually there are radicals. A lot of times we have big numbers. And then a lot of times we have to simplify. We might have to simplify fractions, which a lot of us don't like. Well, what is the most common mistake made when setting up the quadratic formula? I'm going to say, now there's a bunch of them. All right, there's a bunch of common mistakes. Usually there are simplifying radical mistakes. So usually somebody messes up in simplifying. That's actually not the quadratic formula issue. That's an issue with, like last section, breaking down radicals, simplifying radicals, etc., etc. Sometimes there are calculator mistakes. Because you forget the parentheses. And probably the other biggest mistake I see is somebody tries to plug it all in at once. They try to do too much at once. Remember, your calculator does not have a plus or minus button. You don't want to use the radical in your calculator anyhow. So basically that's pretty much the most mistakes I see. You probably look it up. They'll say somebody says they'll misremember the formula. Well, you'll never have to memorize the formula. I'm always going to give it to you. So that's usually not an issue for us. Sometimes people will miswrite it. They will forget the plus or minus. They'll forget to write this. They'll write it incorrectly. They'll do that kind of falls under that too much at once category. All right. So that's it for Firestarter 21. All right. So Firestarter 22, you must have equal to 0. This one's equal to 0. All three of them are equal to 0. So I'm already ready to set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find A, B, and C. So A in this problem is 1. Remember, there's a 1 there. Not the x squared. A, B, and C are always just numbers. B is -4. C is -5. So that's our first thing. We're always going to do that first. You must have. This is a required step. You must have this. This shows me you're listening. This shows me you know that A, B, and C are always numbers. All right? So that is required. Now, we're going to say, I'm going to write this formula. I'm going to write parentheses instead of A, B, and C. What I find is that people make mistakes with the calculator. They make mistakes trying to plug the numbers in and at the same time trying to write the formula. So, like I said in class the other day, some of you guys are trying to run before you learn how to walk. So I'm just going to slow it down. I'm going to write the entire formula, but wherever I see a letter, I put an empty set of parentheses. So the opposite of B, plus or minus square root. Instead of B, I write empty set of parentheses. Minus 4AC all over 2A. All right, that's it. Now, wherever I see an A, I'm going to put 1. So I'm going to put 1 here. I'm going to put 1 here. So look, wherever I see an A, I put 1 in the parentheses. Now, wherever I see a B, I'm going to put negative 4. Oh, that's the wrong spot, sorry. So wherever I see a B, I'm going to put negative 4. So I put negative 4 inside the parentheses, negative 4 inside the parentheses. Now, wherever I see C, I'm going to put negative 5. So inside the radical is a fancy math word. So that little orange box right there, it's a fancy math word called the discriminant. And that's just a fancy math word that says whatever is underneath the radical. All right. It does some describing. We'll talk more about that next week. But that's what I do not use my calculator with the radical. Right. So I'm going to go x equals the opposite of negative 4. So I'm looking at this part right now. I'm going to put positive 4. Plus or minus radical. All right. Now in my calculator, I'm going to put left parentheses, negative 4, right parentheses. So I'm just typing into my calculator exactly the way it seems. So negative 4 parentheses squared. The reason I make the parentheses show up is because most people forget them and they get a calculator mistake here. So minus 4 parentheses, 1 parentheses, negative 5. I type it in just exactly like that. So this turns into 36. Notice I still have the radical. I haven't done anything with it. And the bottom becomes 2. Now we're just simplifying radicals like we've done before. So square root of 36, so x equals 4 plus or minus 6 all over 2. If the radical disappears, we have to split this. So since this 36 was perfect, it turned into this 6, no radical. I have to write my answers as 2 separate answers. So I'm going to say 4 plus 6 all over 2, and x equals 4 minus 6 all over 2. 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Negative 2 over 2 is negative 1. So that's it. Done. B, it's literally step by step the exact same process. I'm not going to change anything at all. So I'm going to say A, so we're on B now. A equals 1. B equals 8. C equals 19. Done. That's step 1. Now, I'm going to take, and I'm going to write x equals the opposite. Instead of B, I write parentheses. Plus or minus the square root, parentheses squared, minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I'm going to plug my numbers in. The reason I like using the empty set of parentheses also is because it saves me a little bit of headache. Like it saves me a little bit of space. So I already have my formula written, and I'm not home to make another line to plug it in. So I put 1 here, I put 1 there. All right. B is 8, so I put 8 here, I put 8 here, and then C is 19, so I put 19 here. Now remember, this is the discriminant right here. I'm plugging that into my calculator all by itself. I'm not using the radical. I'm not using the plus or minus. Your calculator does not have a plus or minus button. So since I didn't put negative 8, so the opposite of 8 is negative 8, plus or minus radical. And in my calculator, I'm going to type in left parentheses, 8, close parentheses, squared, minus 4 times A is 1, 19. I end up with negative 12 all over 2. Now, we talked before that if a negative shows up, it turns into I. So our quadratic formula work is done. We are not doing anything new at this point. We're just doing stuff we've already done. I'm going to break down 12. Remember, 12 is 4 times 3. Remember, that's using the idea of simplifying radicals that we discussed before. So my problem turns into x equals negative 8 plus or minus. This 4 right here turns into this 2. Remember, the negative sign right here turns into I. And this 3 stays in jail forever. It's all over 2. This is a great answer. The only way it can be a little bit better is if I notice this piece, and this piece are all divisible by 2. So I can divide all 3 by 2, and I end up with negative 4 plus or minus I radical 3 over 1. That's why I didn't write it. So I divided all 3 pieces by 2 because all 3 were divisible by 2. It's like basically simplifying a fraction. All right, that's it for B. Now C, I'm going to do the exact same thing, exact same setup. Look, it's already equal to 0. I'm already equal to 0, so I can find A, B, and C. A is 8, B is negative 8, C is 2. Now I'm going to plug it in, so I'm going to rewrite the formula. I'm going to say x equals the opposite of B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. Now I'm going to plug things in. A is 8, so I put 8 here. Make that a little better. 8 there, 8 there. I put negative 8 in for B, so that's negative 8. So I put negative 8 here, put negative 8 here. C is positive 2, so I put 2 in right there. Now remember, this is the discriminant. It's a fancy math word that just basically says whatever is inside the radical. That's the only thing I plug in my calculator to start. The opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. That's why I write positive 8. Plus or minus square root. The bottom is 16. So now I'm just going to plug in my calculator. Left parentheses, negative 8, close the parentheses, squared. Minus 4, left parentheses, 8, right parentheses, close parentheses, 2. Hit enter. I get 0. Right? So x equals 8 over 16. This is the one time plus or minus isn't going to matter. See, notice no plus or minus. 8 over 16 can be simplified to 1/2. So the only time you'll have one answer, if 0, one answer. Look, that's positive. We're going to talk a little more about this next week. 2 real answers. And look, if negative, we're going to have 2 imaginary answers. And that's it. All right, I'm going to go a little bit quicker on Firestarter 23 because I did do this one in class. So remember, the only difference between 23 and 22 is we have to make sure all these equal 0. Now, if you're struggling, my recommendation for you is make them equal 0, find A, B, and C, do all that first. So if you're struggling on the new assignment, what I want you to do first is, like for A, I'm going to minus 35 from both sides because I want the right side to get 0. So my right side is going to turn into 3x squared plus 8x minus 35 equals 0. And then I'm going to find A, B, and C. So A is 3, B is 8, C is negative 35. Look, you started a problem, great. Now B, maybe I would do the same exact thing for B. Now me personally, I like to keep this guy positive right here, the x squared. So I would probably move the minus 12x from both sides. And I would add 5 to both sides. That would make this side 0. It doesn't matter to me which side you make 0 if you make the other side 0. So I'm going to have 2x squared minus 12x plus 18 equals 0. If you made this side equal 0, so if this side would have been 0, then that would have been minus, plus, and minus, right? But I did not do that. So you'll get the same answer at the end. You'll just have the opposite signs of what I have to start. So your A, B, and C will all be opposite signs if you did it that way. But I like to have my A positive. This is what I like to have. So A is 2, B is negative 12, C is 18. I don't think there's a reason why anybody can't start the problem. So like C, I'm going to add 2x squared to both sides. But you could have added 2x and minus 3 and get the same answer at the end. So I just went through, and the first thing I did, like I said, I just made them all equal to 0 because it's the first thing I have to do anyhow. And I found A, B, and C because that's pretty much stuff anything anybody can do. So A is 2, B is negative 2, C is 3. Right? That's kind of everything that we need to know how to do to start. All right. Now, I'm going to go back to example A. So remember, once I want empty parentheses first. So I'm going to say x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I'm going to take a, I'm going to plug it in here and here. I'm going to take b, I'm going to plug it in here and here, and I'm going to take c, I'm going to plug it in there. The keyword is softball. The keyword is now softball. I'm just going to remember we talk about this fancy math word called the discriminant. This is called the discriminant. That's a fancy math word. It just means everything inside the radical. So when I write my next step, -8 plus or minus, I am not using my calculator for plus or minus or the radical. That's why I write them here. 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm just going to type in my calculator what's underneath the radical. I'm going to write left parentheses, 8, close parentheses, square button, minus 4. Make sure you use the minus sign and not the negative symbol, right? Not the one will multiply and one will subtract. So make sure you're using the subtraction symbol. 4 times 3 times -35, and when you're doing -35, it's got to be the negative symbol. So it just gets kind of confusing there. So I end up with 484 inside the radical, which is good news because if you didn't know, 484 is perfect. So this becomes x equals -8 plus or minus square root of 44 is 22 all over 6. Now remember, since the radical disappeared, I have to have two separate answers. Basically, I have to split my plus or minus up. So I have to have x equals -8 plus 22 all over 6. And I got to have x equals -8 minus 22 all over 6. Now, if you didn't know, -8 plus 22, that is 14 over 6. -8 minus 22 is -30 over 6. So my best answer is going to be x equals 14 over 6 turns into 7/3. -30 over 6 turns into -5. Two answers. Now, just FYI, if you haven't figured this out yet, anything that has nice answers at the end, anything that has no radicals, no i's, was something we could have factored using our GPS that we learned a long time ago. All right, so that's something that if you're really good at factoring, you might have been able to do this without using the quadratic formula. All right, so B, I'm doing the same exact thing. X equals the opposite of B. Look, no letters, just parentheses. B squared. The reason we use these parentheses is to save us from making calculator mistakes, save us from writing down the formula mistakes. I haven't even worried about plugging it in, and I just want to make sure I wrote down the formula correctly. All right, because I see that mistake all the time. A is 2, so I put 2 here and I put 2 there. B is -12, I put -12 there, -12. And C is 18. So I have x equals +12 because the opposite of negative, plus or minus, square root symbol. I put this in my calculator because that's the discriminant. Remember, it's a fancy word that means whatever's underneath the radical, it's 0, all over 4. Now the square root of 0 is really easy, 0. When 0 is in the radical, it's the only time plus or minus doesn't matter. So x is going to be equal to 3. All right, C, we did this in class. Like I said, I moved the -2x squared over to the right side. You could have moved everything over to the left side. You would have opposite signs here, here, and here. So if you have that, that's fine. You'll get the right answer at the end. So it does not matter to me which way you do it. Remember, I write empty set of parentheses instead of the formula. So I don't even worry about plugging stuff in. I just make sure I write down the formula correctly. because believe it or not, that seems to be one of the bigger mistakes, is people just write it down wrong. All over 2a. So wherever I see an a, I put 2, so I put 2 here and I put 2 there. Wherever I see a b, I put -2, so I put -2 there and there. Wherever I see a c, I put 3, so I put 3 right there. Now, x equals the opposite, so the opposite of -2 is +2, plus or minus radical, because remember, I am only plugging in the discriminant. I'm only plugging in what's inside the radical, right? All the way over here, that's discriminant. And believe it or not, so first period, if you're from a first period class, you guys didn't even catch my mistake, and I made a math mistake, like an adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing mistake, and nobody even caught it. But if I plug that in a calculator, it should spit out not -16 like I told first period that nobody caught, -20. And that's the kind of mistakes we'll see sometimes, where you won't make an algebra mistake, you'll just make a really dumb mistake. And luckily some people caught it next period and we fixed it, so I apologize first period for that. Now, so I end up with -20. Remember, negative inside the radical means I is going to show up. 20 is not perfect, but 4 times 5 is 20. And 4 is perfect. So my next step, I'm going to have x equals 2 plus or minus. This 4 right here turns into 2. This negative turns into I. And this 5 stays in jail forever. Now it is all over 4. That's a great answer. The only thing you could do better, and that's if you're being super picky, all 3 of those pieces can be divided by 2. So the absolute best answer is 1 plus or minus I radical 5 all over 2. Done. All right, Firestarter 24, last one I'm going to do. I'm kind of picking the pace a little bit now. So remember, first thing I'm going to do is make sure they equal to 0. A already equals 0, so I'm ready for A, B, and C. B already equals 0, so I'm ready for A, B, and C. C does not equal 0, so I'm not ready for A, B, and C. So the first thing I would do is I would add 10 to both sides. So C, I would make it 2m squared minus 7m minus 3 equals 0. Right? That's what I would do first. Now remember, A is already ready to be with A, B, and C. So I say A is 2, B is -3, C is -5. Remember, I always want you to write that step out. It's going to make sure that you understand that A is whether A is positive, whether B is supposed to be negative. Make sure A and B don't have letters with them, because you can't plug letters into the quadratic formula. So now I'm going to rewrite the formula. Remember, I write the formula without any letters. I just put parentheses. So I say x equals the opposite of B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Now, I really think this is important to make sure you don't try and plug it in and write the formula at the same time, because that's where people seem to make a lot of mistakes. They try to rush things. So just do that separate. Now, A is 2, so I put 2 here, I put 2 there. B is -3, so I put -3 here, -3 there. C is -5, I put it right there. Now remember, I cannot plug it all into the calculator. I'm going to say x equals the opposite of -3 is +3, plus or minus. Remember, I'm talking about this thing called the discriminant. Right? That's the discriminant. It's a fancy math word. It just means what is inside the radical. So I plug in the discriminant into my calculator. I end up with 49. So look, I still wrote the radical because I did not put that part in the calculator. This problem, if you would have plugged it in with the radical, it might have worked out nicely. But the reason we don't do it all the time, I don't really want you to do it all, is because a lot of times when you guys try to plug in radical and the discriminant, you plug it in incorrectly, or it's not perfect. This time it is perfect. So we end up with x equals 3 plus or minus 7 all over 4. So remember, I have 2 answers, but I have to split my answers because the radical disappeared. So I have to say x equals 3 plus 7 all over 4, and x equals 3 minus 7 all over 4. 3 plus 7 is 10. 3 minus 7 is -4. So my best answers are going to be x equals 10 over 4, which is 5 halves, or 2.5. -4 over 4 is -1. That's it. Done. B, exact same concept, exact same step-by-step process. right? I'm going to say A is 2, B is 3, C is negative 20. I'm going to write my formula exactly the way I've been writing it the whole entire time. So look, even though I'm pretty good at math, I still take my time out. Before I do anything, I just write empty set of parentheses, plus or minus square root b squared in parentheses minus 4ac all over 2a. Like I said, it just saves you it makes it less likely you're going to make a mistake plugging things in. So I put 2 in for a here and here. I put 3 in for b here and here. And I put negative 20 in for c right there. So in my calculator, I'm going to plug in the discriminant. So I'm not going to plug in negative 3. I'm going to put minus 3 plus or minus radical symbol because I'm not plugging any of that into my calculator. So I got the discriminant was 169, which is good for us because I know that's perfect. It makes my life way easier. So I get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 13 all over 4. So two answers, but remember I have to split them because the radical disappeared. So I have x equals negative 3 plus 13 all over 4 and x equals negative 3 minus 13 all over 4. Negative 3 plus 13 is 10 all over 4. Negative 3 minus 13 is negative 16 all over 4. So my best answers are going to be x equals, this is a 10, 5 halves, and x equals negative 4. Done. Last one. C, I'm going to say a equals 2, b equals negative 7, c equals negative 3. All right, last thing we're going to do, remember last one, where I say x equals the opposite of b, so I'm writing my formula with parentheses instead of letters. Minus 4 times a. It doesn't take that long to do this. Once you get in the habit of doing it, it makes your life so much easier, so I'd recommend continuing to do it that way, even if you start feeling comfortable with the quadratic formula. So a is 2, so I put 2 next to the 4, I put 2 in the bottom. B is negative 7, so I put it in the first set of parentheses, and the second set of parentheses. C is negative 3, I put it in the last set of parentheses. X equals the opposite of negative 7 is positive 7. Plus or minus, remember I'm going to do this discriminant. So in my calculator, I'm going to put that right in my calculator without the radical, and I end up with 73. That one is not perfect. Right? All over 4. Now, 73 is prime, so this is our final answer. Nothing can be broken down. We are done here. I will accept that as a great answer. If you really wanted to, which you do not need to, you could still write this as two answers. You could say 7 plus radical 73 all over 4 and 7 minus radical 73 all over 4. All right, that's it.